Just sign it, Iris. My father pushed the paper across the kitchen table with 2 fingers, as if he were sliding a restaurant bill toward me. I looked down at the first page. At the top was my full name. Under it was a statement admitting that I had taken my SUV, struck a man on a dark road, panicked, and left him lying there. I read the first paragraph twice. Then I looked at my sister. She was standing behind our father with both hands pressed against her mouth. Her eyes were red. Her shoulders shook at exactly the right moments. For 14 years, my family had believed they knew who I was. The unsuccessful daughter. The distant one. The woman who had moved away and never amounted to much. They were wrong. But that was not the night I planned to tell them. My mother sat beside my father, twisting a tissue between her fingers. "You don't have to make this harder than it already is," she said. I looked back at the paper. There were details in that confession that I had never told anyone. The road. The approximate time. The direction the SUV had supposedly been traveling. Even the sentence about how frightened I had been after the impact. I had not written any of it. Someone else had. My father leaned forward. "Your sister made a terrible mistake," he said. "But she has a future." I stayed quiet. "She has a campaign coming up," he continued. "People are watching her. One criminal charge could destroy everything." My sister finally lowered her hands. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Her voice cracked. I believed she was frightened. I just wasn't sure she was frightened for the reason everyone else thought. My father pointed at the confession. "You live away from here. You don't have children. You don't have a husband. Your work is private. Nobody knows much about your life anyway." He paused. Then he said something I knew he had probably been rehearsing. "You can survive this." That sentence told me everything. They weren't asking me to help my sister. They were asking me to disappear for her. My mother reached across the table. "If you do this, we'll make sure you have everything you need. We'll stand by you." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because for 14 years, they had barely stood beside me at all. I had been the daughter they mentioned with a shrug. The one who lived somewhere else. The one whose career they never understood. At family gatherings, people asked my sister about her work, her plans, her connections. When they asked me, they usually asked when I was coming home. Now, suddenly, they needed me. My sister stepped closer. "Iris, please." I looked at her. She had borrowed my SUV earlier that evening. She had told me she only needed it for a short drive. I had handed her the keys without thinking twice. A few hours later, an injured man was lying in an intensive care unit with a shattered hip. And my family had decided that I was going to become the person responsible. My father tapped the confession. "All you have to do is sign." I looked at the signature line. Then I looked at the date. My stomach tightened. The date was correct. The time was correct too. Too correct. Someone had known exactly when the accident happened. I lifted my eyes toward my father. "Who prepared this?" Nobody answered. My sister looked down. My mother suddenly became very interested in her tissue. My father leaned back. "That doesn't matter." It mattered to me. It mattered more than anything. Because a false confession written after an accusation was one thing. A confession prepared before I had even agreed to take responsibility was something else. I folded my hands on the table. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my father softened his voice. "We're family." I had heard those words my entire life. Usually they meant I was expected to forgive something. This time, they meant I was expected to surrender my future. I picked up the paper. My father watched me carefully. My sister stopped crying. I folded the confession once, then again, and placed it back on the table. "I need to think." My father frowned. "There isn't time." I stood. My mother grabbed my wrist. "Where are you going?" I gently pulled my hand free. "Home." My sister stared at me. For the first time that night, her expression changed. Not sadness. Not guilt. Fear. I noticed it. I said nothing. I walked out of the kitchen and closed the door behind me. Only later would I understand why that small expression mattered so much. At the time, I only knew one thing. My family had spent 14 years deciding that I was the easiest person to sacrifice. They had no idea what I had spent those 14 years becoming. And they had no idea what was still inside my SUV. The strangest thing about being underestimated for years was how quickly people started believing their own story about you. My family had done that to me so completely that, by the time they tried to make me responsible for my sister's crime, they did not even think they were taking a risk. They thought they were choosing the obvious person. Me. For 14 years, I had been the daughter who left. The daughter who lived somewhere else. The daughter who never brought home impressive stories, expensive gifts, or a husband everyone could talk about at dinner. At least, that was the version of me they had created. My sister, Claire, had always been different. She knew how to enter a room and make people notice her. She remembered names. She knew which hand to place on someone's arm when she wanted a favor. She could turn a simple family dinner into a performance. People admired that about her. My parents certainly did. When Claire talked about her plans, my father listened carefully. When I talked about mine, he usually checked his phone. I learned early that correcting people was exhausting. So I stopped. If someone wanted to believe I had a small life, I let them. If a relative asked whether my work was going well, I smiled and said yes. If my mother told someone I was doing something in administration, I didn't interrupt her. She never asked what I actually did. And I never volunteered the answer. There were reasons for that. My work involved the legal system, and over the years I had learned that privacy could be more valuable than praise. I had spent years around legal documents, investigations, evidence, and the careful language people used when the truth mattered more than feelings. I understood how quickly one careless sentence could become part of a record. I understood why evidence had to be preserved. I understood why people who were innocent sometimes made themselves look guilty by talking too much. But none of that mattered to my family. To them, I was still the girl who had left home because she couldn't find her place. That was why I came back for my niece's birthday. She was one of the few people in the family who never treated me like a disappointment. Her birthday was held at my parents' house on a Saturday evening in October. The kitchen smelled like vanilla cake and roasted chicken. There were balloons tied to dining chairs, paper plates stacked beside the sink, and photographs spread across the counter. For a few hours, everything felt almost normal. My niece ran from room to room with her friends, while my mother kept asking everyone whether they had eaten enough. My father stood near the television talking about politics. Claire moved through the house as if she owned it. I remember watching her from across the room. She looked happy, confident, untouchable. Then she came over and asked for my SUV. I just need it for a little while, she said. She was holding a glass in one hand and my keys were already in my other. I asked where she was going. Just around the corner. She smiled. I handed her the keys. That was the last ordinary moment of the night. A few hours later, she came back. Something about her had changed. Her face looked pale. Her breathing was too fast. She placed the keys on the counter without looking at me. You okay? I asked. Fine. One word. Too quick. I looked at her hands. She was trembling. Before I could ask anything else, my mother called everyone into the dining room for cake. I let it go. I wish I could say I immediately knew what had happened. I didn't. The first thing I learned about the accident came later, when my father quietly told me that a man had been struck by a vehicle nearby. He didn't say my SUV was involved. Not at first. He waited. Then he looked at me. Where was your car tonight? I remember the question more than anything else. It was not concern. It was calculation. By the time the family gathered in the kitchen, the atmosphere had changed completely. Claire was crying. My mother kept saying we needed to stay calm. My father was already making phone calls. And then came the explanation. Claire had taken my SUV. The SUV had been involved in an accident. A man was seriously injured. And somehow, within minutes, they had decided the safest solution was for me to say I had been driving. I remember looking at Claire. She wouldn't meet my eyes. My father told me that people would believe I had panicked. He said I could explain that I had been frightened. My mother said the family would support me. Nobody asked how the injured man was doing. That stayed with me. The person lying in the hospital had become a problem to solve. My sister's future had become something sacred. And my life had become expendable. I listened. I did not argue. I did not accuse anyone. Because something had already become clear to me. They were not improvising. They had a story. And if they had a story ready that quickly, then someone had been preparing for this moment before I even knew there was a moment to prepare for. That realization was the first crack. I just didn't know yet how wide it would become. The first person who believed my story was not someone in my family. He was a man I had never met before. That mattered more than I understood at the time. After I left my parents' house that night, I did not call my mother. I did not call Claire. I did not call my father and demand an explanation. I went home. I placed my keys on the kitchen counter and stood there for a few seconds, listening to the silence. My SUV was parked outside. It looked exactly as it always had. That was the strange part. Nothing about it looked like the center of a criminal investigation. But I knew better than to touch it. I did not open the doors. I did not check the seats. I did not look through the storage compartments. I did not wipe anything down. I didn't even move it. Instead, I called my attorney. His name was Daniel Mercer. We had known each other professionally for several years, although I had never needed him for anything this personal. When he answered, I gave him the basic facts. Someone had taken my vehicle. Someone had been involved in an accident. My family wanted me to accept responsibility. There was already a written confession waiting for my signature. Daniel listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked one question. Did you touch the vehicle after your sister returned it? No, good. There was a pause. Then he asked, did anyone else? I don't know. Then don't find out yourself. His voice was calm. Mine was too. That was something I had learned over the years. Panic made people careless. Carelessness created mistakes. And mistakes were exactly what someone investigating a serious crime needed to avoid. Daniel told me to leave the SUV where it was. He would contact the appropriate people. I agreed. Then he asked something that caught me off guard. Why do you sound like you're already thinking about evidence? I looked through the kitchen window at the vehicle sitting beneath the porch light. I've worked around investigations for a long time. He was quiet for a moment. You've never told me much about your job. I don't tell my family much either. That may be helping you now. I almost smiled. By morning, the SUV was being treated as evidence rather than as my property. That distinction mattered. People sometimes imagine evidence as something dramatic. A blood-stained object. A hidden weapon. A photograph that suddenly solves everything. Real investigations are often much quieter. A timestamp. A location record. A camera angle. A digital system that remembers something nobody thought to erase. A vehicle can remember more than its owner realizes. Modern cars can contain information about movement, access, and activity. Phones can create timelines without anyone thinking about them. Cameras record roads, parking lots, businesses, and intersections. People forget. Machines often don't. I understood that. So I waited. A forensic specialist examined the SUV properly. I stayed away. I did not suggest what they should look for. I did not tell them what I suspected. And most importantly, I did not try to prove my innocence myself. That was Daniel's advice. Let them discover it, he told me. I remember sitting across from him that afternoon. He had a folder open on his desk, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at me. You know what happens when people try to defend themselves too early? I shook my head. They start filling gaps. What gaps? The ones the evidence hasn't filled yet. He closed the folder. Don't fill them. That became the rule I followed. Meanwhile, my family kept talking. My mother called twice. My father called 3 times. Claire sent messages saying she was sorry for everything. None of them asked me what the investigators had found. They wanted to know what I was going to do. That told me more than any confession could have. They were still thinking about the story. I was thinking about the facts. 2 days later, Daniel called me. His voice sounded different. Not frightened. Focused. There is something in the vehicle, he said. I sat down. What? We're still verifying it. I waited. He continued carefully. There appears to be digital information that may help establish who was actually using the SUV during the relevant period. I closed my eyes. For the first time since the accident, I felt something other than fear. Not relief. Not yet. Just certainty that the truth had somewhere to begin. Daniel warned me not to discuss it with anyone, especially my family. I agreed. That evening, my father called again. "You need to come back tomorrow," he said. "Why?" "We need to settle this before it gets worse." I looked at the SUV through the window. Maybe it already has. He became irritated. "You don't understand what's at stake." I almost told him that I understood more than he thought. Instead, I said nothing. After the call ended, I stood alone in the kitchen. For 14 years, my family had mistaken my privacy for emptiness. Now they were making the same mistake with my silence. They thought I was waiting because I was afraid. I was waiting because I knew something they didn't. Evidence did not need my family to approve of it. It did not care who my sister was. It did not care who my father knew. It did not care which version of me they had spent 14 years selling to other people. And somewhere inside my SUV, something was beginning to remember what happened that night. I just had to let it speak. My sister did not panic when I refused to sign. She escalated. That was the moment I understood something important about Claire. She had never expected me to fight her. She had expected me to fold. The next morning, my phone began ringing before 8. First, it was my mother. Then my aunt. Then my father's older brother, a man I had not spoken to in almost 2 years. They all asked the same basic question. Why was I making this difficult? Nobody asked why I was being accused. Nobody asked whether I had actually been driving. They asked why I would not help my sister. My mother called again around 9. "Iris, your sister is terrified." I was standing in my kitchen, making coffee. "So am I said. There was a long silence. Then she sighed. "You don't understand what this could do to her." I looked out the window. "I understand. You have to think about the family." That phrase again. The family. It seemed that whenever my family needed something from me, they became one voice. But when I had needed them over the years, everyone suddenly became an individual with a busy schedule. My mother lowered her voice. "Claire says you were the one who usually let her take the SUV. That isn't true. She remembers it differently." I almost smiled. That was how the story started changing. Not with one huge lie. With small ones. A detail here. A memory there. A sentence repeated often enough that people began treating it as fact. I had seen that happen before in legal settings. People rarely build a false story all at once. They build it one comfortable sentence at a time. By lunchtime, Claire had called 3 relatives. By evening, 2 family friends had contacted me. One of them said, "Your sister is already being torn apart over this." I asked by whom. She did not answer. Instead, she told me I should be more compassionate. I thanked her and ended the call. That was becoming my pattern. I listened. I answered only what needed an answer. And I wrote everything down. Every call. Every message. Every request. Every version of the story. Daniel had told me not to argue with anyone. "Let them talk," he said. We were sitting in his office when he gave me that advice. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him and a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold. "They're going to pressure you," he said. "They already are. They'll pressure you more when they realize you're not moving." What should I say? He looked at me. "Nothing that isn't necessary." I waited. Then he added, "Silence isn't weakness if you know why you're using it." That sentence stayed with me. So I waited. My family did not. Claire began telling people that she had believed I would protect her. My father told relatives that I was being selfish. My mother said I was letting anger destroy my sister's future. None of them mentioned the injured man. That bothered me more than their accusations. A man was lying in an intensive care unit because someone had hit him with my SUV. He deserved the truth. Not a convenient story. Not a family solution. Not a confession written for someone else. The pressure increased when my father called one evening and told me he had spoken with people who could make this easier. I knew what he meant. Connections. Influence. People who were used to solving problems before those problems reached the public. You need to cooperate, he said. I sat quietly at my dining table. What happens if I don't? His voice hardened. Then you are choosing to hurt your sister. I looked down at my notes. There were already several contradictions in the family story. Claire had first said she returned the SUV before 10. Later, my mother said she came back closer to 11. My father said the accident happened around the same time Claire returned. None of the times fit together. I didn't point that out. Not yet. Instead, I asked one question. Dad, why are you so certain I was driving? He became quiet. Only for a second. But I heard it. That hesitation. Then he said, because Claire told us. I thanked him and ended the call. I wrote down the exact time. That night, Claire sent me a message. It was longer than the others. She told me she was sorry. She said she loved me. She said our family could survive this if I stopped making things complicated. Then came the sentence that mattered most. You can fix this. I stared at those 4 words for a long time. Fix this. As if the accident had been a broken window. As if the injured man were an inconvenience. As if my future were something that could simply be traded away and repaired later. I did not respond. The next morning, Daniel called. His voice was calm. They've started asking about your written statement. I know. Don't give them one. I wasn't planning to. There was a pause. Then he said something that made me sit up. The forensic team found something else. I looked toward the window. The SUV was still parked exactly where I had left it. What did they find? We're not ready to say exactly what it means. But it may establish who had control of the vehicle during the critical period. I said nothing. Daniel continued. And Iris? Yes. Let your family keep talking. I understood what he meant. Every new story they told created another version that investigators could compare against the evidence. They thought they were building a case against me. They were actually building a record. And they were becoming less careful with every word. For the first time, I wondered how far my sister was willing to go to protect herself. I would soon find out. Because Claire had stopped trying to convince me privately. Now, she was preparing to convince everyone else. My family made one mistake that changed everything. They stopped trying to handle the accusation privately. Until then, they had treated me like a problem they could solve around a kitchen table. Now they wanted an audience. I understood why. When people cannot control the truth, they sometimes try to control the room where the truth is being discussed. Claire was very good at controlling rooms. She knew how to make people feel sorry for her before they had time to ask questions. By the end of that week, almost everyone in my family had heard some version of the story. I had borrowed my own SUV. I had driven somewhere I should not have gone. I had hit a man. I had panicked. And now, according to Claire, I was refusing to protect my family. The details changed depending on who was listening. But the message stayed the same. I was the difficult one. Claire was the victim. My father was the concerned parent. And everyone else was supposed to choose a side. I did not. That seemed to make them even more nervous. One evening, my father called and said, "We're having a family meeting tomorrow." About what? You know what? I did. He gave me the address. It was not at my parents' house. It was at a private meeting room connected to a family friend's office. That told me this was no longer just a family discussion. My father wanted witnesses. I called Daniel. He listened quietly. Then he said, "If you go, don't go alone." I won't. And don't explain anything that doesn't need explaining. I know. He paused. They built this meeting for a reason. I looked at the invitation my father had sent. Then I'll let them use it. The next evening, I arrived with Daniel. There were more people than I expected. My parents were there. Claire was there. Several relatives were seated along one wall. A few family friends sat near the back. Some of them were people my sister knew through her political work. The room had been arranged carefully. Claire sat in the center. I was given a chair across from her. It felt less like a family meeting and more like a small courtroom where someone had already decided who was guilty. Claire began crying before anyone asked her a question. "I don't know what else to do," she said. Her voice carried easily across the room. She was always the person I trusted most. I watched her twist a tissue between her fingers. I never thought my own sister would abandon me. Nobody interrupted her. She continued. She knows what this would do to me. My father nodded slowly. My mother looked at me. I said nothing. Claire looked directly at me. You don't even have to admit everything. You just have to help us. That word again. Help. It had become the family word for sacrifice. My father leaned forward. You have a chance to stop this before it destroys everyone. Daniel shifted slightly beside me. He did not speak. Neither did I. Claire kept going. She talked about her career, her reputation, her future, the people watching her, the opportunities she could lose. She spoke for several minutes without mentioning the injured man. That absence was louder than anything she said. Finally, one of my father's friends asked, "What exactly happened that night?" Claire hesitated. Only for a second. Then she answered. Iris took the SUV. I looked at her. She had changed the story again. I had not taken it. She knew that. Everyone in the room had seen her ask for my keys. But nobody corrected her. My father simply said, "We need to focus on what happens next." I felt something inside me settle. That was the moment I stopped hoping my family might suddenly remember who I was. They were committed to this. Not because they believed I had done it. Because they believed I could be made to carry it. The room became quiet. Then my sister looked at me. Iris, say something. Everyone turned toward me. For 14 years, I had been the quiet daughter. The unsuccessful one. The distant one. The person nobody expected much from. Now they were waiting for me to defend myself. I looked around the room. Then I said, "I have nothing to add." Claire stared at me. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm waiting." My father frowned. "For what?" I looked at him. "For the facts." Nobody spoke. Claire suddenly raised her voice. "You're doing this on purpose." Daniel remained calm beside me. My father tried to regain control. Enough. But Claire had already lost hers. She accused me of wanting to see her destroyed. She said I had always been jealous of her. She said I was hiding behind lawyers because I knew the truth would come out. I let her speak. That was the strange thing. The more she talked, the less I needed to. At first, the room reacted with sympathy. People nodded when Claire cried. Then something changed. A relative asked about the timing. Another asked why the written confession had been prepared before I agreed to anything. Nobody answered that question. Claire looked toward my father. My father looked toward the floor. The room became quieter. Then the door opened. An investigator stepped inside. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse anyone. He simply asked whether my father had made the earlier statements about the vehicle's timeline. My father's face changed. "Yes," he said slowly. The investigator nodded. "We'll need to clarify those." Claire stopped crying. Completely. For the first time since the accident, she looked genuinely afraid. I noticed. And I knew the room had just changed. The audience my family had gathered to watch me surrender was no longer watching me. They were beginning to watch her. The first real reversal did not come from my mouth. It came from a machine. For days, my family had treated my silence like a weakness. They believed that if they kept talking long enough, their version of the night would become the only version anyone remembered. But evidence does not get tired. It does not become embarrassed. It does not change its story because someone cries. The morning after the meeting, Daniel called me before I had finished breakfast. "Iris, the investigators have completed another part of the vehicle examination." I put down my coffee. What did they find? "There are digital records that help establish the timeline." I waited. He continued carefully. "They're still verifying everything, but the information is not matching the story your family has been giving." I did not ask him to tell me more. I had learned to let investigators do their work. "What happens now?" I asked. "They compare everything." Everything. Vehicle data. Surveillance. Phone records where legally obtained. Statements. Locations. Times. He paused. "And they look for consistency." That last word stayed with me. Consistency. That was something my family's story did not have. By that afternoon, the SUV was no longer just my vehicle. It was a timeline. Investigators examined its recorded activity and compared it with what had been reported. The times mattered. The locations mattered. The sequence mattered. And slowly, the story my sister had told began developing gaps. At first, the gaps were small. Claire had said she returned the SUV at one time. My father had given another time. My mother remembered something different. Then the surveillance footage added another problem. A camera from a nearby business had captured the SUV around the relevant period. It did not answer every question, but it added another piece. Then came the state police records. Those records created another timeline. And that timeline did not fit neatly beside Claire's version. I remember Daniel telling me that the investigators were not interested in family arguments. They're not asking who sounds convincing, he said. They're asking what can be established. That distinction changed everything. My father still believed influence could solve the problem. He called me again. You're letting this get out of control. I was sitting at my desk. No, I said. I'm letting the investigation continue. You know how these things work. I almost smiled. He was right. I did know how these things worked. Just not in the way he thought. He lowered his voice. Your sister needs you. I looked at the notes beside me. Then she should tell the truth. He became angry. You think you're better than us now? I said nothing. That question was never really about the accident. It was about the identity my family had assigned to me. They could accept me as unsuccessful. They could accept me as distant. They could accept me as the daughter who never quite figured things out. What they could not accept was the possibility that they had been wrong about me for 14 years. The next day, Daniel sent me an update. The forensic team had compared several pieces of information. The vehicle data showed activity during a period that did not fit my sister's latest account. The surveillance footage raised additional questions. And the state records created another contradiction. None of these things alone was the entire answer. Together, they were becoming difficult to ignore. That was how the truth arrived. Not as one dramatic revelation. Piece by piece. Quietly. Patiently. The way truth often does. My family reacted differently. My mother stopped calling. My father became more aggressive. Claire became unpredictable. One day she insisted the investigators were misunderstanding the data. The next day she claimed she had never given the statement they were questioning. Then she blamed stress. Then she blamed me. Every explanation created another problem. I watched from a distance. I did not correct her. I did not tell reporters anything. I did not call relatives and announce that I had been right. There was nothing to announce. The evidence was doing that for me. A few days later, Daniel asked me to meet him at his office. When I arrived, he had several documents spread across his desk. He looked more serious than usual. I want you to understand something, he said. I sat down. The investigation is moving beyond the accident itself. I waited. They are looking at the statements people gave. I understood immediately. Because of the contradictions? Yes. He closed one folder. And because some of the contradictions are becoming too specific to dismiss as simple memory problems. I looked at the documents. For the first time, I saw the possibility of something larger. My family had not only tried to blame me, they had created a story. And now investigators were asking who created it, when it was created, and why. That was dangerous territory for them. But I still refused to celebrate. A man was injured. That fact had never changed. Whatever happened to my family next, it would not undo what happened to him. That evening, I received a message from my father. It contained only one sentence. You have no idea how powerful the people you're fighting are. I read it twice. Then I deleted the message from my screen, but not from my records. Because he was right about one thing. There were powerful people involved. He just had the wrong idea about who was fighting whom. I was not fighting my family. I was not fighting my sister. I was not even fighting their influence. I was waiting for the facts to finish speaking. And they were getting louder. The next call came from Daniel just before midnight. His voice was quiet. Iris, the prosecutor's office is taking a closer look. I sat upright. What does that mean? It means this may be moving beyond the local investigation. I looked toward the dark window. Then he added the words that changed the entire direction of the case. They're considering bringing in a special prosecutor. For the first time, I understood that my family's private story might soon be examined by people they could not simply call at home. And if that happened, every carefully chosen word they had spoken would have to survive the light of the evidence. I had spent years being the person nobody noticed. Now, without saying a word, I was becoming the person everyone would have to explain. The biggest reveal about me did not come from me. It came from someone who had no reason to protect me. By then, the investigation had moved far beyond the kitchen table where my father had first pushed that confession toward me. A special prosecutor's office was reviewing the case. My attorney had submitted my sworn account along with the records showing where I had been and what had happened to my SUV. I had answered every question carefully. I had not exaggerated. I had not guessed. I had not filled in gaps that the evidence had not filled. That was important, because by then, my family had discovered that their version of the night could not survive simple questions. Claire had changed her story more than once. My father had given investigators information that did not match earlier statements. My mother had admitted remembering things differently depending on who was asking. And the written confession they had wanted me to sign had become something far more dangerous than they expected. It showed that someone had been preparing a story before I ever agreed to tell it. Still, none of that explained who I really was. My family had spent years believing I had a small, ordinary life. They thought I worked somewhere behind a desk. They thought I had never moved beyond the quiet daughter they remembered. They were about to learn otherwise. The meeting took place in a conference room at the prosecutor's office. I sat beside Daniel. Across the table were investigators, legal staff, and a senior official overseeing the review. My parents were there. Claire was there too. She looked exhausted. For once, her usual confidence was gone. The senior official opened a folder. He looked at me. Then he looked at my attorney. I've reviewed the materials you submitted. Daniel nodded. The official turned another page. Then he looked back at me. I believe we've crossed paths professionally. My father shifted in his chair. I said nothing. The official continued. You worked in the legal system for several years. My mother stared at me. Claire slowly turned her head. My father looked confused. The official did not sound impressed or surprised. He sounded certain. I recognize your name from previous matters, he said. The room became completely still. That was the first time my family heard the truth about my career from someone other than me. And even then, I did not explain it. I didn't need to. The official did that for me. He explained that my professional experience had involved legal procedure and investigative work. I understood how evidence was preserved. I understood the importance of accurate timelines. I understood why statements had to be compared against independent records. My father stared at me. You never told us. I looked at him. No, that was all I said. Claire shook her head. So this was planned. Her voice was sharp now. She knew exactly what she was doing. The official looked at her. What do you mean? She knew how to manipulate an investigation. Nobody spoke. Then he calmly answered. Understanding procedure does not create evidence. Claire opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He continued. The vehicle records existed before anyone knew what they would show. The surveillance footage existed before your sister's statements were compared against it. The state records existed before this office became involved. He closed the folder. Your sister did not create those things. My father leaned forward. But she knew what investigators would look for. The official looked at him. That does not explain the contradictions in your daughter's statements. Silence. I remember watching my father's hands. They had always looked powerful to me when I was young. Those same hands had pushed the confession toward me. Now they were resting flat against the table. Still. Empty. Claire began crying again. But this time, nobody rushed to comfort her. The room had changed. People who once looked at me with pity were now looking at me differently. Not because I had demanded their respect. Because they were finally seeing what had been there all along. My family had confused privacy with failure. They had mistaken quietness for ignorance. They had believed that because I did not explain my life, there was nothing worth explaining. Claire looked at me. You could have told us. I thought about that. 14 years of family dinners. 14 years of questions I answered with half smiles. 14 years of being introduced as the daughter who lived away. She was right. I could have told them. But I had never believed I needed to prove my worth to people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. I said nothing. The prosecutor turned back to the documents. There is one issue we still need to address. Everyone became still again. The question is no longer simply what happened during the accident. He looked directly at my sister. We need to establish who was driving the vehicle and whether anyone knowingly attempted to shift criminal responsibility onto another person. Claire's face went pale. My father looked toward her. For the first time, he did not look like a man protecting his daughter. He looked like a man realizing he might have protected the wrong story. I lowered my eyes. I felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. The truth was finally becoming visible. But visibility was not the same as victory. There were still consequences coming. And there was still one piece of the story my family had never expected anyone to examine closely. The confession. The paper my father had once called our way out. The paper I had refused to sign. It was about to become part of the case. And once investigators asked who had written it, when it had been written, and why it contained details I had never provided, my family's carefully constructed story would begin collapsing from the inside. The paper my father once pushed toward me became one of the most damaging pieces of evidence in the entire case. At the time, he had treated it like a solution. A simple signature. A few paragraphs. One person taking responsibility so everyone else could go home. He had never imagined that refusing to sign it would make investigators look more closely at the paper itself. The first question was simple. Who wrote it? The second question was harder. When was it written? And the third question was the one my family could not answer without exposing themselves. Why had it been prepared before I had agreed to anything? I was not in the room when investigators first examined the document. Daniel told me about it afterward. They're looking at the wording, he said. What about it? It contains details you never gave them. I sat quietly. That did not surprise me. I had noticed those details the first night. Daniel continued. They're also looking at the timing. I knew what that meant. The confession had not appeared after a long investigation. It had appeared almost immediately. Before I had been interviewed. Before I had agreed to anything. Before anyone had established who was driving the SUV. That made it very different from a desperate family suggestion. It looked prepared. My father had once called it a way to protect Claire. Now investigators were asking whether it had been created as part of an attempt to shift criminal responsibility onto me. The family began to panic. My mother called me one afternoon. Iris, they're making this much bigger than it is. I was sitting at my desk. It's already serious. We were trying to protect Claire. I closed my eyes. There it was. The first honest sentence anyone in my family had given me. Not an apology. Not exactly. But an admission. You knew she was driving? I asked. My mother did not answer. Mom? She began crying. I knew she had taken the car. That wasn't my question. Silence. Then she whispered, I was scared. I looked down at my hands. So was I. She said nothing. I ended the call without anger. There was nothing left to argue about. The investigators continued. They examined messages. They reviewed communications. They compared the family's statements with the timeline established through the vehicle records and surveillance. The more they compared, the harder it became to explain the differences. Claire had said one thing. My father had said another. My mother remembered something different. The written confession contained details none of them could explain. And the independent evidence kept pointing back to the same basic fact. I had not been driving. My attorney warned me not to expect one dramatic moment when everything would suddenly be over. These cases don't usually work that way, he said. They build. He was right. The truth was not arriving like a thunderclap. It was arriving like a wall being taken apart one brick at a time. The investigators also kept the injured man at the center of the case. That mattered to me. It would have been easy for everyone to become obsessed with my family's lies and forget why the investigation had started. A man had been struck. He had suffered a serious injury. His life had been changed. Someone had left him there. That deserved accountability. Not excuses. Not family influence. Not a carefully written confession designed to make the wrong person responsible. Eventually, Claire was formally questioned again. I was not present. I did not need to be. She had to answer the evidence herself. Her earlier statements were placed beside the records. Her explanations were tested against the timeline. And each new answer created another problem. At one point, she claimed she had misunderstood the time. Later, she said she had been under stress. Then she suggested that someone else might have used the vehicle after she returned it. But the evidence did not change with each explanation. It remained where it had always been. The investigators had something my family never expected. A record that did not care who was crying. My father's political connections did not change it. My sister's reputation did not change it. My silence did not change it. The facts simply remained. Then the focus widened. Investigators began asking whether anyone had knowingly attempted to interfere with the investigation. That question frightened my family more than the original accusation. I could see it from the messages that started arriving. My father became less demanding. My mother became apologetic. Claire stopped contacting me directly. Relatives who had once told me to confess suddenly stopped answering my calls. Some even sent short messages saying they had never understood the full situation. I did not respond. I had spent too many years being asked to carry things that were not mine. I was not going to start carrying their excuses too. Then Daniel called. The special prosecutor has made a decision. I sat down. What decision? They're moving forward with the case against Claire. I breathed out slowly. And the attempt to blame me? That will be part of the investigation too. I looked toward the old folder sitting on my desk. The confession was inside. The same document my father had once believed would save the family. Now it was helping investigators understand what the family had tried to do. That was the irony I could never have planned myself. They had written the story because they believed I was powerless. They had made it detailed because they wanted it to sound real. They had pressured me to sign because they thought my silence meant surrender. Instead, the paper became a record of their desperation. Claire would finally have to answer for the accident. And my family would have to answer for something else. Why had they decided that my life was worth less than hers? That question had no digital record. No surveillance camera could answer it. No forensic specialist could explain it. Only they could. And for the first time, they were going to have to live with the answer. The sentence ended the criminal case. It did not end what happened to my family. That part took much longer. When Claire was finally sentenced, I did not go to the courthouse expecting to feel victorious. I thought I would feel relieved. Maybe angry. Maybe even proud that I had refused to let them destroy me. Instead, I mostly felt tired. The courtroom was quiet when the sentence was read. Claire sat beside her attorney. My father was behind her. My mother sat on the other side. They looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Just somehow less certain. For months, they had acted as if their influence could control the story. Now there was nothing left to control. The evidence had been reviewed. The statements had been compared. The attempt to shift responsibility onto me had been exposed. Claire was held accountable for what she had done. And that was the end of the legal part. But when I walked outside that day, I realized something. Winning a case did not give me my family back. It only showed me that I had been right to protect myself. The first apology came from an aunt. She approached me outside the courthouse and touched my arm. I didn't know, she said. I looked at her. Didn't know what? That they were going to blame you. I did not correct her. She had known enough to call me selfish. Enough to tell me I should help Claire. Enough to believe the story without asking me a single serious question. But I simply nodded. I understand. She started crying. I didn't. I had already cried over this family years before. I just hadn't known what I was crying for. After that, the family divided. Some relatives admitted they had been wrong. Others insisted they had only been trying to help. A few disappeared completely. My father stopped calling. My mother left messages. Sometimes they were apologies. Sometimes they were explanations. Sometimes they were simply my name followed by silence. I listened to some. I deleted others. I did not hate them. That surprised me. I thought I would. For a long time, I had imagined that if my family ever realized they were wrong about me, I would finally feel powerful. Instead, I felt free. There was a difference. Power still needs an audience. Freedom does not. I returned to my work. I went back to ordinary routines. Coffee in the morning. Long days. Quiet evenings. No family meetings. No explanations. No one asking me to prove what I was capable of. My career continued to grow, but I stopped thinking about whether my parents would ever understand it. That had been one of the strange lessons of the whole experience. For 14 years, I had allowed their opinion to occupy a small corner of my mind. Even when I ignored their comments, some part of me still wondered whether I should explain myself. Now I didn't. I had nothing left to prove. The hardest part was my niece. She had been a child when everything happened. She had loved her mother. She had loved me. And she had watched adults turn something terrible into a family war. For a while, I stayed away. Not because I didn't care. Because I cared enough not to make her choose. Years passed. She grew older. We exchanged occasional messages. Birthday cards. Short phone calls. Small pieces of a relationship that had survived something neither of us had created. Then one afternoon, she asked to see me. We met at a quiet cafe. She was an adult by then. She looked so much like Claire that for a second, I felt the old ache return. But then she smiled. And I saw my niece again. Not my sister's daughter. Not part of the family conflict. Just the girl who had once run through my parents' kitchen with frosting on her hands. She looked at me for a long time. Were you angry? I smiled faintly. For a while. What happened? I got tired. She frowned. Of being angry? Of carrying something that wasn't mine. She understood more than I expected. Then she asked the question I knew would eventually come. Why did everyone lie about you? I looked down at the table. There was no courtroom anymore. No prosecutor. No investigators. No evidence folder. Just two people sitting across from each other. So I told her the truth. Not every legal detail. Not every ugly conversation. Just the truth she deserved. Her mother had taken my SUV. Her mother had been driving when the accident happened. The family had tried to place responsibility on me. And I had refused. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked away. I didn't know. I know. Did Mom hate you? I thought about that. No, then I corrected myself. I don't think she hated me. What then? I looked at her. I think she needed me to stay small. The words sounded different when I finally said them aloud. For years, I had wondered why my family had treated me that way. Maybe it was easier for them if I stayed the person they remembered. The quiet daughter. The unsuccessful daughter. The one who could be called when something needed fixing. The one who would accept less. The one who would stay grateful for being included. They had built a version of me that was convenient. And when the truth threatened that version, they tried to protect the story instead of protecting me. My niece reached across the table. I wish I had known. I placed my hand over hers. You were a child. She nodded. We sat there quietly. There was no dramatic forgiveness. No perfect ending. Some things cannot be repaired simply because people finally understand them. My relationship with my parents never returned to what it had been. Maybe because what I had lost was not really my family. It was the belief that they would always choose me when choosing me became difficult. That belief was gone. But something else had taken its place. Peace. I no longer needed my father to admit he had underestimated me. I no longer needed my mother to explain why she had chosen fear over truth. I no longer needed Claire to regret what she had done. They could carry their choices. I would carry mine. And mine had finally become simple. I chose the truth. I chose not to become the person they had written on that piece of paper. And somewhere along the way, I realized that was the only victory I had ever really wanted. 14 years of being underestimated ended with a piece of paper. But my freedom began much later. It began on an ordinary afternoon, sitting across from my niece in a quiet cafe, watching her struggle with a truth that had been hidden from her for years. She was no longer the little girl who had run through my parents' kitchen with frosting on her hands. She was an adult now, old enough to understand that families could love each other and still do terrible things. Old enough to know that silence did not always mean weakness. And old enough to deserve the truth. She looked at me for a long moment. So Mom really was driving? Yes. And everyone knew? Not everyone. But enough people knew that they should have told the truth. She looked down at her coffee. I could see the questions moving across her face. Why did they blame you? I took a slow breath. Because they thought I was the person who could survive being sacrificed. She looked confused. What does that mean? I smiled sadly. It means they believed my life mattered less than your mother's. I did not say it with anger. I had spent too many years carrying anger that never belonged to me. Instead, I told her what happened. Her mother had taken my SUV. The accident happened. A man was seriously injured. And instead of facing what had happened, my family tried to build another story. A story where I had been driving. A story where I had panicked. A story where I would accept a felony so Claire could keep her future. My niece listened quietly. When I finished, she asked the question I had expected. Why didn't you tell everyone who you really were? I smiled. Because that question had taken me years to answer for myself. Because I didn't need to become impressive to prove they were wrong. She looked at me. I continued. My family thought I had failed because I didn't tell them everything. They confused privacy with failure. I told her that my career had been part of the legal system for years. I had worked around investigations. I understood evidence. I understood procedure. I knew why people should preserve records instead of destroying them. But none of that was the most important thing. The most important thing was that I had never needed to use my career to make myself bigger than anyone else. I simply did my work. Quietly. Professionally. And I built a life that belonged to me. My niece wiped her eyes. I wish you had told me. You were a child. I still feel bad. You don't have to. She shook her head. I hate that you went through that alone. I looked at her. I wasn't completely alone. I thought about Daniel. The investigators. The forensic specialists. The people who looked at facts instead of family names. But there was another person I had forgotten to mention. My younger self. The woman who had left home 14 years earlier without knowing whether she would ever feel understood. The woman who had been called unsuccessful because she refused to explain every step of her life. The woman who had learned that sometimes being underestimated gave you something valuable. Space. Space to build. Space to grow. Space to become someone without an audience. I had spent years thinking that one day my family would finally see me. Then the accident happened. And I learned that being seen was not the same as being known. My family had seen me for years. They simply had not known me. They knew the version they had created. The quiet daughter. The distant daughter. The one who lived away. The one they could call when they needed something. They did not know the woman who had built a career. They did not know how carefully I had learned to protect evidence. They did not know how much I had learned about people. Most of all, they did not know that I no longer needed their approval. That was the part that changed me. Not the courtroom. Not the investigation. Not even the moment my family's story collapsed. Freedom came when I stopped waiting for an apology to make my life feel complete. My niece reached across the table. I love you. I held her hand. I love you too. There was no dramatic reconciliation after that. No perfect family dinner. No scene where everyone apologized and everything returned to normal. Some relationships do not survive the truth. And some should not. My relationship with most of my family remained distant. I accepted that. For years, I had believed losing them would mean losing myself. Instead, I discovered the opposite. When I stopped trying to fit inside the person they expected me to be, I finally had room to become myself. I thought about that confession sometimes. The paper with my name at the top. The story they wanted me to sign. The life they wanted me to surrender. I could have signed it. I could have taken the blame. Maybe some people would have called that loyalty. Maybe my family would have called it love. But love that requires you to destroy yourself is not loyalty. It is control. And I finally understood that truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives through a record, a timestamp, a witness, a quiet professional who asks the right question. Sometimes it arrives through a piece of evidence that nobody thought mattered. And sometimes it arrives when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided not to listen. I did not win because my family was punished. I won because I refused to become the person they had written on that paper. I chose truth when silence would have been easier. I chose dignity when surrender would have bought me temporary peace. And I learned something I wish I had understood 14 years earlier. You do not have to become smaller just because someone else feels comfortable when you are small. You do not have to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it. And you do not have to destroy yourself to prove that you love your family. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply stand still, tell the truth, and let the facts speak for you. So let me ask you something. If your own family tried to make you take the blame for something you never did, would you stay silent and let the evidence speak, or would you confront them immediately? Tell me what you would choose in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about betrayal, hidden strength, and the moment truth finally catches up with the people who tried to bury it, subscribe. There are more stories waiting for you.